Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Okay, so I am here in Ann Arbor, and I, as you know with Paranormal Karen, I have an obsession with fairies. Not necessarily a good one. I know there's a lot of pagans and Wiccans that think of fairy spells and stuff. I, as a paranormal investigator, have had trouble with fairies, so they've sort of become an obsession. So as I go on Atlas Obscura, I see Ann Arbor has fairy doors all over the city. And when you hear this gentleman that I'm talking with, you'll know in 2 seconds you'll hear that Midwest friendly kindness. Just answered the email. Of course I'll talk to you. That the Midwest is known for. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Wright. Yay!
Thanks, Karen.
And your website is urbanfairies.com, correct?
Yeah, there's a hyphen between urban and fairies.
A hyphen.
Because for whatever reason there was a urban fairies. Which,
right. They maybe they prefer it. Oh, there was an urban fairy.
Yeah, I believe it was initially that was a clothing line that maybe never took off or something.
Wow, no.
I haven't looked into it recently, but I think that's what it was and wasn't used.
You got to call them and just show them your hyphen and go, see, I got it.
Yeah.
I beat you. So now we have to start from the beginning of how you discovered, because you don't. Yeah, I mean, I like your place here. You already had a scary monster thing that we're going to talk about, and I walk in, you got a skeleton, a glittery skeleton in your office, so already I'm like, this is going to be great. And so your story about how you got into fairy doors.
All right. Well, largely I would say it was influenced by my wife, who's Irish, or she's American but of Irish descent. Her grandparents were Irish, and her mom was born in Glasgow, Scotland.
And you already referred to her as the boss.
Well, not always, but
do we need to edit that out?
No, that's all right. Factually speaking, I mean, she's the organizer of things. As you can see here, I'm not very organized, and she's much better at scheduling. But that's her interest is always focused on fairies and leprechauns and such. And this being St. Patrick's Day Eve, and she teaches in the public schools. She's introducing some young fives to some of that mythology and all.
Well, and that's the thing that's interesting, is that she knows the mythology, because what you stumbled upon here, which is, by the way, the public can go to your website and see. They can see it when they're here, and so this is fascinating. So I didn't even know that part, that she was really into the mythology.
Oh yeah, totally. That's. In fact, I think she might have been 5 years old herself when she went to Ireland, and she was searching for fairies and leprechauns at the time. So she's always had that interest, and I've had interest in illustration, and that's part of my background. And so I've collected children's books for yet another reason, and so together we've got quite the compilation of folklore, fairy tales, and whatnot, and and so that kind of gave us a basis for our interest in fairies and whatnot, the fairy world.
And I have to ask, have you ever found a fairy? Because I have found a few, causing trouble.
Well, that is part of the mythology of fairies, is that you don't always know if you're encountering a fairy or not. And so, and I get asked that quite a bit. So I can't say for certain that I have, but there's some very suspicious folk and happenstances that might indicate that I have.
Wow. So now tell me about your house.
Well, our house is over 100 years old, and it's in Ann Arbor here. And it was non-extraordinary house. In fact, when we went to put an addition on our house, we're in a historic district, but the Historic Commission deemed that it had no significant value historically. So it's like...
It's like my love life.
Nothing to write home about?
No significant value at all.
So there was that, but that gave us the go-ahead that we could, do some addition work, and which we did, and subsequently we moved. This is a little bit more visual than it is audio, but there was we had a closet under our stairway, and if you can imagine a wedge shape under a stairway, the door was at the tall rectangular end of that wedge, and because it actually used to be a door to the basement at one time, a million years ago. Well, 100.
To be exact.
Yeah. So with the addition, we put a hallway to the side of the stairway, and it made more sense to have the door there on the broad side of this triangle. But it's still a triangle wedge-shaped closet, and so I was thinking, at the time, this is also factors into the whole story. My wife was running a preschool program in her house, so we had kids running around all the time, and which was kind of fun.
That's a nightmare for me, but I understand you might enjoy that.
Yeah, I think Kathleen enjoyed it more than I, maybe. But at any rate, so it occurred to me that, there's some unused wedge of the closet, or difficult to get to, so I put a 3-foot high closet door there for the kids, so they could go in one and come out the other and whatnot. Next thing you know, there's a 6-inch high one to the right of that. So there's a graduated set of doors, and that was the first fairy door.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there was some discussion about, what might live in there, and that's where the fairies came from, and
the kids must have had a great time with.
Oh, they certainly did. They wrote notes to the fairies and whatnot, and they'd peek in and look up. There's a small set of stairs that are in that door. It opens up into a space in the wall,
into a tiny set of stairs in the wall.
Yes, correct. Okay. And at the top of those stairs is yet another door, but the best that we can tell, it's always locked or shut. So, whenever we're peeking in there. In fact, with the advent of cell phones, I was able to get a cell phone in there and take a picture up the stairs, which is kind of fun.
And was it? Well, that's a little peeping Tom, though.
Oh, it certainly is. It certainly is. I think that's true of all
fairy.
No, when you think about biologists and whatnot, there is a bit of voyeurism there. Looking into the mating habits of whatever it is.
So that's fabulous. So and that is there pictures of that on your website? Because
I believe so.
Okay, because I got to look for that one because
it's interesting because my website, I started many years ago, 2006 or so.
And you go through, you show where the fairy doors were, and then this happened to this one, and then it was reconstructed, and a little fairy reconstruction. And
and what with technology and all, hardware and software have outstripped what I was doing there, and the program that I built the website with is no longer valid, really. So I've got an old computer in the basement, and so I got to make special effort to update it. So that makes it a little bit more difficult, and I've got to learn some new software for that. But I'll get to that.
Yeah, it's good. It's really great how it is, and it shows everybody what they need to see. So
right, but I still like to keep up to date with the latest news and what I've seen and discovered or heard, and and this interview, I would put that on there.
Oh my God, my 2 listeners will be thrilled.
All right. Well, then we probably have 6 or so then.
Yes. And now everybody I talk to is like, oh yeah, I grew up here. I know about the doors, and they know all of them. And they are so their first one in your house, and it has the little stairs up and everything. And the kids must have gone crazy for it.
Yeah. They loved it. But it's interesting, especially with children. At some point, they become I don't jaded. And that's too harsh a word, but complacent. It becomes part of their life. It becomes a little less magical when it's there all the time.
And then they go to they go to college or something, and they miss them. They're like, it's odd not to have them.
Yeah, there is a bit of that too.
So it starts in your house. Now we're looking at in front of them. You have fairy doors all over the library.
Not necessarily all over the library, but let's see. There were about 3. They were all over our house, and that was back in 1993. That first one showed up, and it wasn't until 2005 that they started sprouting up around downtown.
Wow!
So that's when I started. The website and doing this more in earnest because I was sharing it with the general public,
and people were into it.
Oh yeah, immediately. It was really fun to see that both children and adults gravitated towards the phenomena. So now at the library you had some, and they were books, and I'm looking right at them because did they get moved out, or they have little fairy door windows? That's a thing with the fairy doors, is that they're so engaging that they kind of invite closer inspection, and very often we have folk that are maybe not as disciplined as the next person, and little fingers.
You can make anything sound nice. I am just going to say that. Because what I heard was a couple of jerks busted some stuff.
Well, there is that happens as well. I mean, there are some a-hoes that
pushed it to the line.
Yeah.
We pushed it to the line.
I'm so angry now. No, some actually do get vandalized, and it becomes obvious that it was done intentionally, whereas a lot of times it's just wear and tear. Some of the doors are outside, so there is weathering that happens as well. Yeah. But at the library, the librarians, I mean, they've got a job to do. They can't be policing the fairies, or those visiting the fairies.
Did you ever think maybe it was fairies that wrecked it?
It would be more likely it would be goblins, I would think, than the fairy. Well, I don't know if I know.
But you know the mythology. Like I was a little like, hey, I'm going to have to get this paranormal-ish, and now you're already my fairy expert, and I'm so excited.
Well, I am a certified fairyologist. There's my certificate right there.
How do you get to be a fairyologist?
Well, that you have to study fairies, of course, and you have to have a printer, and helps to have a degree in graphic design, and be able to select some really fancy typefaces.
Can I be an associate fairyologist?
You actually can, because subsequent to becoming a certified fairyologist, I began certifying other fairyologists. Wow. And although there is a test that's involved, I can show you that. There's only one question. It's multiple choice. Well, it's actually multiple choice for the younger age group.
Oh, okay.
But
I would get that assistance?
Well, it's actually on the same page, so you get to see those A, B, and C answers, and you get 3 chances.
Oh, okay.
So, so far, no one's failed the test.
Oh, wow. Well, we don't want to push my luck.
Yeah.
It's funny because I tell this in a comedy thing, and I'm going to put it on my podcast. I'm going to work at Paranormal Convention in Australia, and they love my fairy attachment story. And I'll just give you a little, people know I talk about it all the time, but I had someone over my house that was a Wiccan. We always have some sort of gathering at my house, and she had us do a fairy spell, and it went bad.
Ooh.
I know. And something got attached to me. And it's, I'll send you the funny story.
Is that what that is?
No, it's my goiter.
Oh, all right.
But I've kind of had an obsession and a little, you got to be careful with paranormal. Don't make fun don't have problems with things you can't see. Mm-hmm. But the whole mythology. It was funny you said goblin right away. Now, in these, and we're going to get to your favorite fairy doors for the people that are coming, if you have one. I have a feeling you like to support all of them.
Yeah. It's like children, It's like you might have a favorite, but you don't say.
And so
right, Sam, Del, whichever one of you.
This, this does connect. I know I have no segues in my head, but I had someone loan me a harp. I wanted to learn to play the harp, not knowing that fairies love the harp. They react to the harp. Do you have any little tiny harps in any of the places? Should I get you a little harp at Michael's?
Yeah, I think you better.
Okay, I think they would like it. Then if there's any trouble, you just give them the harp. You say,
give them the harp. Yeah. Is that like giving them the boot? Give them the harp.
It's like giving kids, what is that? Pacifier.
Yeah.
Pacifier. You can pacify them. But mine was actually a puka.
Well, that's yet another.
You see, you squinched your nose.
Yeah, well, in fact, the mythology is fairies aren't what
Disney made them.
Yes, yeah. Although, see, there's so much here to uncover, but the original mythology in the UK, because there are fairy-like creatures in most cultures, but the fairies were sometimes less than benevolent and sometimes worse than mischievous. And they tended to be human looking or human size as well, but maybe with something off about them.
Yeah.
And I know people like that. There's something
You're
off
looking at one right now.
I wonder. See, that's why when people ask, have you ever seen a fairy? It's like, maybe.
Yeah. Well, that is true in the paranormal. Anything that tries to replicate a human, they never quite get it right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's our God's way of making us, so that we know each other.
Well,
but then again, I've been on a lot of dates. That could have gone either way. So go ahead.
And they weren't fairy tales.
Yes, right.
I'm guessing. All right.
So they were sort of more. I always thought they're not quite like elementals, but they don't have a consciousness like us. Like they know, I want that. That's all they know. I want that. It's not the repercussions of who would get hurt if I want that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, that's more, and yeah, it's a little more primal. When you say elemental, it's primal, and that's a bit like children, without knowing limits. You go bust things or inspect things, and you can see how that ties in with how children are reporting seeing fairies. They seem to have more of a connection with the fairy world, and as adults, we tend to grow out of that. We tend to become, I guess, a little bit more mundane in our existence. But the history of fairies and mythology of fairies, I see as something that's more amorphous and more, it's changing. And I, years and years ago at the Ark, I believe the Ark is a local folk music venue, and there was a musician there who was describing a song that he was singing and how his son sang this song, and I think it was it doesn't really matter what the song is, but he described how he messed up the words. But he went on to say that's how folk music is. It changes with the singer, the musician, as folktales change with the society, the times, generations. They'll change, and that's kind of where I see the urban fairies. They have their roots, their history in ancient mythology. And yet they have history with Disney even, with J.M. Barrie and Tinkerbell. Although, our concept of fairies having wings and being small is a Victorian construct. And yet, why not?
Yeah.
Why couldn't it be? That is also part of the ancient mythology, is the fairy glamour and being able to look different and change their appearance. Or you think you see a fairy at one moment and you turn and there's just a squirrel, or a bird, or a firefly or something like that. Large or small. And so that's where the urban fairies are. There's a mythology that surrounds the urban fairies specifically, and how they are more of a modern manifestation. And that's one of the things I enjoy about it is that very often you have stories that then follow, then physical things follow from the stories, as like our product, if you will follow. Whereas this, here is not a product, the doors, the physicality is there. So there is that engagement with the fairy world. You can come and look at these fairy doors, and then you can imagine the story. And that's the tagline I use is imagination is the key to the fairy doors. It sparks that part of us that might be a little bit dormant, and think about who lives in there, what's going on, in the spaces in the hollow of the wall there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of fun, and my wife, she incorporates that in teaching. She's taught kindergarten for many, many years, and right now she's doing Y5s, which is young fives. It's like it's the younger. It's sort of like prep school for kindergarten in some ways.
Oh, wow!
But it is it's part of the public schools. But nevertheless, she's always tied this into the curriculum, and it helps to engage the kids in science and in writing. She takes the kids on a fairy door tour, and they talk about habitats. So the science curriculum that studies habitats, they look at birds' nests and.
That is just. I just got to say that is. I hate to interrupt you, but because it's so interesting. But that I think is the greatest thing for kids to be outside the book, and like you said, into their mind. What did that fairy do? Can we go in that? What's in that fairy door? That's just fantastic.
Yeah, it really is, because it makes it both at once real for them, tangible. They have something that they can hang on to, exactly, as well as something imaginative. So they can put something new into that, and they write stories, in their manner, as 5-year-olds do. I mean, it's fun to see her translate what they've written,
right.
Unstarvar, it's like, you Swedish?
That's even fascinating. Where did they get it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like maybe because most paranormal investigators are skeptics. I'm not. I'm in on the whole story. I believe everything. If you have, you could, so it's a different angle. So I would be like, where?
Oh, well, let me tell you this story then.
You watch me interrogate a 3-year-old where he learned that. Is that a past life? Why did you know? That's why I don't have kids. I know. I'm not allowed to run.
Because they all left you.
Yes. But,
I'm out of here.
And I would love to hear if you have any stories, because literally these doors are also an invitation.
They are. That's a door. Is what's the idiom? When one door closes, another opens.
Another fairy opens another one,
yeah. That is also a neat metaphor with the doors. Is that they are a passageway to something else, either physically or mentally, and part of the mythology of fairy doors. Originally, a fairy door wasn't a door like, what I'm describing, a physical wooden door with a doorknob. It could be a hole in a hedge or 2 trees arching over, and that space had some magical properties, whether it was they were attributed by humans to that space or not. Or just a beautiful, location. That kind of, or a construct later, like the henge stones, and they put a lintel on top of it, and you've got a doorway, a passageway to someplace else, and that's that. So there is that root.
That intention.
To all of, yeah, exactly.
Intention. A lot of things in paranormal are intention. That's why with people you always should know who you're ghost hunting with, because you get somebody that's really looking to see something negative, you're gonna
right.
Well,
and that's also interesting, because you noted the instance of damage or whatever and how it might happen, and I mentioned goblins. There is a goblin door downtown on Main Street, and it is interesting because that is relatively close to the Ark, which I mentioned before, although it's a newer location, which has a ferry door and a ferry ticket window.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the ticket window dispenses tickets, which are human-sized, so it implies that the tickets are not for the ferries, they're from the ferries, and it's also interesting because although the tickets have all been dispensed, and I have a page on my website devoted to that, and there's 2,000 tickets per roll, and I don't know how many rolls we've gone through, but many. And to date, I have not heard from anyone who's been to an event.
So everybody buys the ticket.
Well, nobody buys it; it's free. I mean, but there is no time or place for whatever the ticket is for.
And you know what's funny about that is I also think, isn't the legend with fairies, though, you have to give them something for them to give you something back?
There is that aspect to mythology, and that is kind of like the monkey's paw sort of thing, careful what you wish for.
Right.
Because if you ask... This is part of the mythology. If you ask something for it, you don't necessarily know what they're going to ask. So if you ask, cure my mother, it might be a tit for tat, and somebody else
Make your
dies.
father sick, yeah.
Yeah. So in general, bargaining with fairies or a leprechaun
has not always had a good ending.
Yeah. So I'd steer clear of that.
You're
I
right.
think
That's
in
what
general.
mistake I made.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, so it's like live and let live, and maybe hello.
That's my little dog.
that was courage.
Courage
or
has
gas.
little-
Oh, was that a grumble?
That was Courage. He has sinus trouble.
all right.
And it shows up in a lot of my podcasts. I always have
does
to
it?
stop and go, if you're grunting, that's the dog. But yeah, that's the bargaining is that's why I kind of find the doors interesting. Now, two things, and I'm on the way here, I'm listening to a podcast called Tales, Tales, and it is about the original fairy tales, which were not for children at all.
No, they're often lessons of morality and whatnot, and ended up, in death or
And watch out for fairies.
Watch out for fairies. I mean, it's Little Mermaid. It was when she got her feet, it was like walking on glass. Apparently, and her feet would bleed. It's like there's some dark things, in exchange for, she wished for legs, and she lost her voice, and that sort of thing, and it's
a lesson on being happy with what you got, right?
there is some of that, and that bit of appeasement. There's also folklore about leaving milk for the brownies and that sort of thing. A little offering so that they won't do this or that.
Did brownies, the cookie, get its name from leaving something for brownies?
I'm not that well versed that I could tell you that. Although I think the pre-Girl Scout brownies might have to are affiliated with the folklore. Okay. I think they're more in tune with that.
And so okay. So
and don't make a deal with a Girl Scout. Thin mints for my soul.
I've done that before.
Yeah, I know.
And now you had. Okay, so first of all, have you had any paranormal experiences that you go, well, I don't know what that was, whether it was fairies or not? Where you're like, well, we don't know what that was.
Well, I'd say most of my life has been probably typical of everybody else's, where I'm sure I put this down here or whatever.
And that's a fairy thing; they move things, shiny things.
Yeah, exactly. And what with food, it's like I'm sure I saved that piece of cake, and you get up in the morning and your wife's wiping her. And it's gone. But
the fairies left some chocolate on her face.
Yeah, exactly. Incriminating. I saw that in what was it, Lord of the Rings, with a Gollum there. Leave some crumbs here, incriminating.
So no special fairy stories.
There may be some right now, which is interesting that
they like you and they help you.
Oh well, certainly I've got I've got some wonderful aspects to my life. So it's not without some sort of blessing, whether it be a fairy blessing or not. I don't know.
Right.
But I try to be appreciative of the good things.
Yes, and there's a big sort of gorilla that usually goes under in your office here because you're a graphic designer.
Oh yeah, he lives here now. He was living in our garage, and prior to that,
he was under a bridge.
Under a bridge. That's Clarence. He's the bridge troll, and I first found him under the bridge that was under construction on State Street below Stadium.
Oh, so he wasn't even yours. You found him.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, I've adopted him, but I could tell you more about his origins. But most bridges traditionally have their own trolls if they're of the appropriate sort, and. So there was a sign on the bridge that had his name on it. I think it said Clarence 14-6 or something, but they misspelled his name. I think it said Clarence or something like that. So
now it all comes together.
Yeah, it's all coming together.
It went right to a story. It's really a clearance sale. Clarence.
So Clarence, although he's almost always squatting because he doesn't fit into a space very well. So he's about 8 feet tall squatting, but according to the sign, he's about 14-6 when he stands up. And he's come with me to various fairy festivals and whatnot, and hung around.
Now, fairy festivals, that's got to be over the top fascinating and almost like you couldn't stop taking pictures because people really get dressed up.
Oh, they do. They do.
They're just beautiful.
Oh.
I mean, and some of them scary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A couple of goblins.
Oh, yeah.
We got
there's all that.
A couple of goblins were on the plane with me on the way here, I think.
Out on the wing, I saw that episode with William Shatner.
Yes. I think he has his own goblins.
Yeah.
But this was wonderful. So tell if you can tell people either your favorite doors or if they come to Ann Arbor, what should they? They'll go to your website. They'll look at you got the map.
Yeah, there is a map that you can download or print, and. One of my favorites has always been the Peaceable Kingdom, although unfortunately the store is closed.
Yeah.
The door is currently still there, and within that door is a smaller fairy store. So should the shade on the door be up, you can actually peek in, or if you're lucky enough to be there when the owner's son happens to be there, he's let people in to come peek. Right. So that one's really kind of neat and special, especially since it's one of the first downtown.
And the bookstore that's very near where I'm staying, they have little footprints you follow to the back fireplace?
Yeah, the footprints actually have always been there leading to the children's book section, and the fairy door there is above the mantle, and it's flanked by a couple book spines rather. Right. And that's kind of fun. That's Nicola's books. So it's also interesting because since the phenomena started, there've been other doors popping up here and there, and some of them are not, well, the ones that are popping up that are not affiliated with the urban fairies. You need to look carefully and with a discerning eye to discover, are those real fairy doors or are those like a birdhouse is to a bird's nest. Oh. And I make that association in that a bird builds a bird's nest. That is their home, their house. Whereas a person builds a bird house in hopes to attract a bird to live there. Right. And then so a lot of people engaged with the concept of fairy doors wanted to invite fairies to be with them, so they built doors and installed them. And sometimes I've noted that businesses, in hopes of attracting customers, put a door there. They're less concerned about attracting fairies than they are customers. And if you can,
it's got the mojo's not right.
The mojo's not right.
Did you ever think of giving them a little garage door?
Yeah. Well, that's also funny because there is a fairy car. There is only one that I know of because the fairies don't really...
Who makes it? Is it a foreign car or is it a...
Well, it's as far as I know, it's domestic. I mean, I believe it was made in Ann Arbor.
Good, 'cause, that would be hard. You were in car country.
Yeah, exactly.
Fairy cars here,
and it's fueled with a domestic fuel, which is Werner's, which is a high test ginger ale. A pop for those in the
Do you ever
Midwest.
Put a little Bacardi in with that ginger with that fuel?
No, but Mentos. Mentos and Werner's is what the fuel is.
Oh, okay.
And currently, that is parked in the window at the Peaceful Kingdom, and it often shows up for the past 12 years, I think. It's been at the Rolling Sculpture Car Show, so people can take a closer look at it. But as I said, the fairies don't need a car, essentially, especially if they're winged fairies. They can just fly there.
Right, if they have a good bus system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You never know.
But it's a cool way to get around. So, and if you have to haul something heavy, and it does have a trailer, which they carry their some of their loot, which goes back to appeasing fairies. There is a phenomena that I wasn't quite expecting, though it did happen at the very first door. Kids would leave things for the fairies, notes and messages and trinkets and whatnot. And that happened at all the doors downtown.
Wow.
What I call fairy droppings, not like a deer dropping. These are things left for them, not by them. But there'd be coins, pennies, buttons, handmade.
Coins, pennies are kind of the things they like.
Yeah,
I think, right? Just by nature, right?
That's what it seems. And inside that fairy store I was describing, which is not a store, because it only looks like a store, because they seem to be mimics. As you said, they mimic human physicality. Thank you. That just rolls off the tongue. They also seem to be mimicking human structures. These doors look like human doors, only miniature.
Right.
And subsequently, this fairy store looks like a store within the store that it was in, but they never sell anything. They don't have business hours. They're never there, and they're hoarders. They're little pack rats, is what they are. And some of these droppings for the fairies, in fact, a lot of them end up in that fairy store, and they're on the shelves in there. There's stacks of coins and little pom-poms and buttons, and somebody had knit a pair of socks with like quadruple zero knitting needles or something.
Fairy socks.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And those are in there, and 2 sets of baby teeth are on the shelves. Yeah.
That's a little. Is the health inspector okay with that? You can just put baby teeth somewhere.
Well, who cares what the health inspector? They say fairies don't need no stinking badges. It's like, well,
that's right. Put a couple human bones in there.
Yeah, exactly.
This is wonderful. So when the people come here, they'll check out your website. Any other news? Anything you would like to?
Well, I'd like to plug my book all the time.
I didn't know you had a book. Please do. Please do.
Well, it's Who's Behind the Fairy Doors, and that's also how much rambling on are we going to do?
We're you know what? And we'll put a link up to your book. So this is the place for it to be. So you tell me, as long as I'm good. I'm happy as a clam here. You take as much time. Tell me about the book.
Okay, the book is sort of one of those serendipitous things that I was working on a book describing this whole phenomena, the doors, and it was much like a hard copy of the website. During this process and all the questions that I get, have you ever seen a fairy, etc., I get asked that, and it's like, well, I can't say for sure. But children they adamantly describe seeing fairies, and it's like, okay, well, that's really cool. That combined with the fact that I would leave guest books at a lot of the host locations of fairy doors downtown, inviting people to write or draw or whatever in these blank journals.
I did see this. Now, I didn't know you made it a book.
Well, it just all kind of came together. So that the drawings that mostly children left of fairies And that question and the inability of children to really render what they want. Partially it's just lack of practice and fine motor skill and whatnot. And I'm trained as an illustrator, so I thought, oh my gosh, I can use their renditions of these fairies and maybe extrapolate and make a sharper image, bring it more in focus. So that's what the book is about. It's on the left side are these original drawings. I scanned them in, and I had hundreds. You
had to pick the best that were
or the most diverse as well, and so I used their drawings, and then I extrapolated and made a sharper rendering. And part of what helped me to realize that is there were a couple drawings of fairies with the fairy door, and the fairy door was obviously the door.
You knew which one?
Yeah, it was rendered well enough that I could recognize it, but it was rendered poorly enough that it was like, yeah, that's not quite there.
Did they have similar fairies?
Well, they varied.
Okay.
They varied throughout. So that also implies that perhaps there are different fairies either visiting or living at a single door or whatnot. So I came up with a collection of these, and I called it Who's Behind the Fairy Doors, which is a little bit misleading in the title, but intentionally. And so that's the first book that I published.
And that's on the website. It's on Amazon. Where can everybody get it? Because I'm going to go get it.
I can give you one right here. I have them here. But it is on the website. They're also available at Sweetwater's downtown. Nicholas Books carries them. A few of the host locations have copies of the book. It was on Amazon for a short while, and I forget what the reason was. I took it off of there. Logistically, it turned out to be a little bit difficult.
But they can email you and find you and buy a book on your website.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Pay by PayPal and whatnot. And
fabulous.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun.
We'll put up a link, and so when you're on the web, podcast, when you're listening, you can go to the thing and click and find it, because we'll have urban fairies up there anyways. But I got here last night, and I became so obsessed with, before I figured out you had a map, because I don't read anything. I'm dyslexic. I read nothing, and I'm looking at each one. I spent.
Oh, that's what courage is here for.
That's right.
No, I before E.
That's a skill, yeah. He has the skill to tell me I spelled things wrong, because people know I can't stand it when they correct me. So I was literally clicking on each door and writing down the address and figuring out how far away it was. Then at about 1 a.m, I go, oh, he's got a little map here. He's got a map. What did I just do? So that's great. Oh, wow.
But that's also something that that I mention on the website. The website is very convoluted, as you might have noted. I mean, you can go back to the first page and click here and end up there and whatnot. And part of that is by design too. It's a little bit of
a way of theory would make it.
Yeah, exactly. That's. Also, when I mentioned, the birdhouse versus the bird nest, when somebody's hoping to put a fairy door at their house or a fairy garden, I always advise them to try to think like a fairy, and even more so, think like the fairy you want to be there. It's much like a wren birdhouse is going to have a smaller hole than one that's for a robin or whatnot. So be careful who you're inviting, because where was I going with that?
Well, I can you were saying if people wanted to put up a fairy door burn, because I know in some cases where there's trouble in homes, if you put a fountain outside or you put something for the fairies outside with pennies in it, you can sort of guide them out of the house.
Yeah.
And have them name their
Well,
place.
and that's also where the mythology with the horseshoe, that fairies were initially allergic to iron.
Yeah, iron.
Well, specifically iron, and that's where the horseshoe above a door was indicative of is to ward off the fairies. And as I said about the changing of mythology is that currently, if there are fairies living in our houses, tons of iron and steel in there. So it's my contention that perhaps over generations they've built up a tolerance.
Or they have a vaccination.
Yeah, possibly.
An iron vaccination.
No, that causes autism.
Oh,
I've heard.
Well, maybe that's happening to the fairies too.
No doubt about it.
Wow. Oh, that's great. So, all right. So they can find your book there.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
was that the aspect of putting fairies doors in or not? You'll also find that the fairy doors come and go. I mean that. At any given time, there may be a fairy door there or not. We've had some of them appear, almost instantly. It's like one day it was there, and the next day it wasn't, and conversely, they can vanish. So I try to keep the map up to date. And as I mentioned, the Peaceable Kingdom, the store closed, and history has shown that when a store closes, that very often the fairy door will vanish along with it. Because it seems to me, my studies have shown that the fairies are not just choosing a building or a structure, although that is a big part of it. It's the people or what's going on there. Like, okay, a coffee shop with pastries, that's inviting in and of itself. But maybe not just any coffee shop. It might also be the people and the building itself.
Right, an arcade might be too loud.
Yeah, exactly. Or it might be just right if they're raucous fairies. So it really is interesting to see how this all transpires.
Do you think there's a fairy door at the White House?
There is sort of, and I would guess that right now it's not occupied, but I've seen pictures and actually these are doors that were small doors of a different proportion, but they were built for a fire suppressant. There's spigots in there for water. So there's these little doors throughout the White House that you open them up, and there's a little spigot in there.
Well, that's interesting because I had the bad fairy trouble, and then I had an apartment where the sink was always dripping, and they had all these plumbers come in, and no one could figure out what's wrong. So one day when I left to go on the road, I put a cup under there. The landlord saw it, come back, the cup is full, and he goes, "Okay, I know something's going on." Still can't figure out. My friend says, "You have a water fairy. Leave a cup of water off to the side for them to play with, and that'll go away." And damn if it didn't work. I just left them their own little cup of water, and the thing never dripped again.
Well, there you go.
So maybe in the White House, they're water fairies.
That could be.
Or they're political fairies.
Yeah.
Or they could be Democrat and Republican fairies. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
I hope they get along better than we do.
Yeah. Somehow I doubt that, because at least what I've noticed is that these urban fairies are steering well clear of any religious or political affiliations.
Right. They're very...
they don't give a rat's ass about what the humans are doing as far as all that goes.
Now, pastries, they probably...
Well, pastries is a whole nother story.
That's how we all get along with pastries.
That's right.
Well, this has been wonderful.
This is like the fourth time you signed up.
Well, it's okay. No, really, I could stay forever. I don't want to take your day because you're right in the middle of work. You get the time, and it was just fascinating. And people know I love fairies, so this is probably going to be my favorite episode.
Oh, well, good.
Have you ever done a podcast? Am I the first?
You may be the first podcast. I've done an interview that was on YouTube, or maybe a couple like that, and some other video-based ones. But and I've done some radio interviews. BBC Scotland called me up.
Wow. See, they would, Ireland, Scotland, they must find this fascinating. I mean, not that we don't.
No, they're like, whatever. Those Americans, they don't even know it.
I don't know what they're doing.
Except for they're all rolling their R's.
Yeah, that's all we know. And we know how to drink like Irish people, right? Like Irishmen. Well, this is fascinating. And I get to go see the doors today.
Yay.
So I'm going to go all over, take pictures. And I want to take a picture picture of your book and put it right up. So I'm so excited. But this has been fabulous. So everybody, urbanfairies.com.
With a hyphen between urban.
With a hyphen, yes. Otherwise, we don't know what you'll find.
No, you're on.
Could be some horrible porn site.
I should probably look and see what it is. I tried to buy it, and it was taken. So
yeah, maybe it's gone now. But well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been fabulous. Everybody, when you come to Ann Arbor, and Atlas Obscura had you guys listening.
Yeah, that was fun.
You must get a lot from them. So that was great. But this is wonderful. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Karen.
Come to Ann Arbor, see the fairy doors.
Thanks, Courage.